Welcome back to our podcast. Today we have Robb, founding Dean, North Central University School of Technology. And Robb's an expert in e-learning, digital media, learning analytics, and the whole application of information technology to learning. Welcome to the podcast, Robb.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm very pleased to be here.
Robb, when I look at how learning has proceeded over the last few decades, it used to be a time when people would go to school, finish school, and that was it. And continuous learning, lifelong learning has been around for a long time. But with the whole potential for technology to have learning that's either tailored to a particular need or adjusted for users' particular learning capability. And I'm thinking of some of the technologies that are out there, such as augmented reality, in which they're talking about people in a technology area may not know how to fix this piece of machinery, but the capability with augmented reality will give them the knowledge that they need at that particular time. And I'm wondering where learning is going now that e-learning itself has been around for, let's say, 10 years. How are we able to use technology to create much more of a tailored experience for individuals?
So certainly the idea of adaptive assessment and adaptive instruction is finally emerging at large in the K through 12 space. And the idea here is that instead of completing an assessment with 50 or 100 items, or instead of taking hours to complete a high-stakes examination, think of something like the SATs, for example. You complete a series of questions, and each question that you complete informs the subsequent questions. So the idea is that the engine that's feeding you questions learns about you, learns about your strength in relative areas against standards, for example, and can get a finely grained reading of your expertise in that standard with a much smaller number of questions. So it's the application of psychometric standards, it's the application of high-end statistical models, and of algorithms that are designed specifically for this task. This is very exciting because what it means is that we can assess quickly and more often without being so invasive in the instructional space or the time that it takes to make these assessments traditionally. The other component here is adaptive instruction. And the idea with adaptive instruction is that you're given instructional sequences or even a series of learning objects based on things like your current understanding of an objective, your learning style or your learning preferences, based on available media. It can be based on areas associated with demographics, your gender, your ethnicity. So it's a chance for people to be much more engaged based on a customized learning sequence that's dynamically generated. Now, this has been around in K-12 for a while, and it's had various levels of success. What's exciting to me as someone that's worked predominantly in higher education is to see how it can be applied in that context, which hasn't really moved very much. We're using a lot of the same classical instructional methods that were used 1,000 years ago in terms of lectures and in terms of seminars. I think this has the potential to be a very disruptive and very powerful way to rethink what we're doing in our colleges and universities.
Well, based on what you were saying, I'm kind of thinking of learning that would be more evolutionary in nature, so that an individual starts into a subject area, has a time in which they're trying to learn it, and a time in which they're trying to apply it, And this assessment tool or software would be assessing them as they progress. So if they come up with an obstacle or part of their learning in which it's clear that they're not able to handle some part of that assessment, it sounds as if this tool or this methodology would then cycle back to that point, that knowledge, the application of that knowledge, and provide the capability for the student to delve into it in more detail and then continue on. So rather than, as you alluded to, rather than have a 3-hour exam, it almost sounds as if it's similar to what I would think of as an agile approach, where the student learns something, there's a testing. If they haven't got it, they go back to the part that they haven't got. Maybe they proceed on some parts, they have to cycle back on other parts, and it's a really integral, evolving nature of testing and assessment, what you're describing there. And I'm trying to think of how that would fit in the university college environment. It suggests quite a radical change that throughout a course, somebody taking a course, that really assessment is on everything that they're doing all the time.
Well, I think the immediate application is, you hinted at, is remediation. So imagine that you're struggling in a calculus class. No one has ever done that. And you're struggling with a specific area. This would allow you, on your own time, at your own pace, to hammer on something that might normally elude you. Your access to a tutor is limited. Your access to your professor or your TA is certainly limited. But this system has infinite patience and is willing to regress and regress until it finds the optimal method for you to learn the very thing you've been struggling with. And it can assess you so that when you're finally ready to re-enter the classroom, you're prepared in a way that you might not otherwise ever had a chance to be. So I think that I don't see this immediately as replacing, cutting a huge swath through lecture halls and replacing survey courses. I think it has an application in preparing students and to work in concert with more classical instruction to help students that might not otherwise be successful, to help them persist and succeed.
Rob, that also suggests to me that the class time could be used quite differently, rather than the traditional approach of class time being understanding the context, or the content, I should say, of the book, and the person in the front of the class is really trying to convey that material. The class time could be more of a session of interacting with that professor's wisdom or knowledge that they've accumulated that's outside of the textbook, much more of a chance to really get into what professors are supposed to be bringing to the classroom environment, and that is their accumulated knowledge, rather than simply just understanding the context of a book itself.
One of my alma maters is Johns Hopkins University, and this is exactly what Hopkins was founded on. The idea that the professor works in conjunction with a group of students or even individual students, and together they explore an area. And fundamentally, the purpose of the adaptive systems could be to provide an initial map for each student and to prepare students for this journey that they would take together with their professor. I don't think this has to be sort of an all or nothing. And many supporters of customized learning vis-a-vis computer-assisted instruction see it that way. I see all sorts of ways for the technology and the teacher to work together and essentially to advance the student in ways that the individual instructor or the individual system could never do.
Now, Rob, would this work for all students? Because some students like to sit there quietly in the classroom and simply absorb material, and they want to be, for lack of a better phrase, spoon-fed the material. Other students are much more engaged, they're motivated, they're really excited by the material, and they really want to jump into it. And that spectrum exists. And I'm wondering, for those students who are more in a traditional sense, they want to just sit there and be handed the material and the professor explain the material for them, would this approach still work for them?
Well, I think actually it would work better in that instance because uh, students who prefer to learn more passively would have access to a broader library of resources that would allow them to absorb. So if you prefer to learn visually and prefer to sit in a lecture, you may avail yourself of hundreds of hours of lectures in a given topic. If you prefer to be more engaged, then there could be media that is more engaging and that requires more of you, more interaction. The key is that the system that makes these determinations is not only smart enough to know your preference, but it learns the way that you learn. And so you may think that you are a certain kind of learner based on your preference, but it may turn out that that's not really the way that you learn best, and that it sees over a period of sequences and over a period of lessons that in some instances you really learn better when you're more engaged and when something is demanded of you. And so this system, when built, we're not there yet. This is still coming. This system would facilitate that and might let you know something about yourself that you wouldn't otherwise realize.
Rob, when you mention that, I tend to think of artificial intelligence. And once we have all of this system in place and we've quite a number of students have used it, I imagine the data, the metadata that we could gather and run it through an AI system around learning, matching that to metrics of some kind. An AI system would be really cool to put on top of this and better understand how people learn and how the difference between memorization and the actual implementation or application of knowledge and how that all works.
Well, sure, and the algorithms associated with that activity are really similar, and in some cases almost the same as the algorithms that we use in AI. But you bring up an interesting point, and that is, while ostensibly these systems are designed to learn about students and designed to create optimal instructional sequences for them. Imagine if we looked at populations of students. And imagine if we ran things like, say, cluster analysis against students that share certain common variables. Imagine what we could learn and how that could be used to create better instructional environments, real and virtual, down the road. Arguably, that could be even more important than the ability to create customized instruction for the individual student. I'm going to suggest one thing that's a little more disruptive here. The idea of a course or even a program, these constructs have been around forever, and they've served us well, but they're primarily in place because they're administratively convenient, because they work well for organization, and because we're very comfortable with them. There isn't anything sacrosanct about the idea of a course. There isn't anything that's kind of dictated or even optimized about the idea of a program. If we're dealing with dynamically generated instruction, if that becomes available, the start and stop of that isn't tied to a time, or isn't even tied to a specific point of expertise against a program learning outcome. Imagine you needed a series of skill sets, and you had some specific idea based on other assessments that these were the things that you wanted to accomplish. I'm the dean of the School of Technology. So let's say I had a master's student who wanted to study cybersecurity and had a very specific idea of what he or she wanted to accomplish in the study of cybersecurity. Now, we know that there need to be standards associated with the master's degree, and we know that the accreditation bodies are taking a long look at that, and should. We need that oversight. Why couldn't you build your own program based on the specific areas that you want to study? Why couldn't you create your own instruction, your own idea of the course, based on the outcomes that you wanted to use in your career? It could be that what we eventually get out of that activity is a whole new model for instruction. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, probably not even in a decade, but I think at some point we're going to need to rethink the idea of our current organization of instructional systems and determine if that's really the best for our students. And I don't know the answer to that.
If we did do that approach where somebody could essentially put together their own learning, would you still envisage that there might be a set of components or concepts or ideas similar to a buffet that they could choose from to load onto their plate, and somewhere it would be assessed that this is the equivalent of a master's degree? Maybe it may not be an MBA or a technology or this or that or master's of engineering, but it would be considered a master's level degree. Or are you thinking in terms of that it would be even more tailored, where an individual could put on their plate some from this buffet and this university and this source, and really create something so tailored that only the algorithms themselves would know that that's part of a master's? I'm just thinking in terms of whether they would still need to choose from a set of predefined components, or would it be so tailored that they could choose their own?
Well, I still think for the foreseeable future that there's value, a fundamental value in the credential. So the idea of a master's degree will still have value. The idea of certain specialties, certain recognition of instruction in certain areas still has value. I wonder, though, if the idea of explicit statements of programs will have value. I think that's probably what decays first. So the idea, you mentioned an MBA, like the idea of a master's business administration. That's a degree that's become increasingly fragmented. And there are all kinds of specialties, and there are all kinds of programs that are associated with an MBA but maybe no longer carry that. Maybe you just have a master's degree in technology, and then after that are the 5 or 6 standards that you've chosen to study. And employers look to see which of those standards that you have in your master's degree based on the positions that they're advertising.
Very cool. As we come to the end of our discussion here, Rob, do you have any final takeaways for the various audience members that may be listening to our podcast?
Well, I think adaptivity is on the agenda. It should be on your agenda if you're an educator, unless you're retiring tomorrow. And even if you are, it's probably something of interest if you're going to continue to follow the industry. Um, there's a famous saying, when all is said and done, a lot more is said than done. And we've seen that in adaptivity. The idea, the concept of adaptive assessment's been around for over 50 years. And it's just now getting to the point in the K through 12 space where it's more broadly accepted, both as an instructional method and as an assessment method. What we're really waiting for, I think, are the tools that will allow adaptivity to be used without expertise in areas like psychometrics and expertise in high-end construction of algorithms. We're waiting for a system. We're waiting for the first killer system associated with adaptivity. Someone's working on it right now. It's out there. We're going to see it very soon. I don't know if it'll be a single system or some amalgamation of some functions. I am certain that the folks at the IMS Global Learning Consortium, and I've been affiliated with them on and off for over a decade, I know they're thinking about adaptivity and the standards associated with that. And I know also that the big learning management technology companies, the big LMSs and such, are thinking about it. So I guess what I would say is keep your eyes and ears open, because I think it's going to happen when it happens very quickly.
Very cool. Thank you, Rob, for taking the time to talk with us today. Thank you very much.
I'm pleased to be here. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay. That's it for our podcast today, and we'll be back with another one in the near future. Thank you.